Hello. I finished a campaign recently where I completed a world conquest on December 19th, 1460, an in-game time world record, and I thought I'd make a video explaining all that went into doing that. For many years, Lambda's December 1472 record stood without serious competition. His tolerance for birding and attention to detail was at a level few cared to match. He was the one who introduced me to the idea of playing EU4 as a turn-based game, with each day being a turn. However, as is often the case, later expansions offered significant power creep, particularly through mission trees, reform progress farms, and easy access to raising. Trisolarian beat Lambda's record early this year by over 3 years, then smashed his own record by 6.5 years, finishing in January 1463, both with an Oirat and Timugals run. Storm had a Timurids run that was so chill he had to regularly defrost his PC, and that beat the record by 4 months, even though World Conquest wasn't his end goal. Part of my desire to make this video is to somewhat demystify a run like this. A lot of times on Reddit when these kinds of runs are shared, there's a refrain of disbelief or awe. Yet, I think in a lot of ways, this kind of campaign is more simple and easy than you might realize. Some of the concerns that might exist in a longer or less optimized campaign simply never matter in a compressed time run. A lot of what makes this kind of run hard to do is the initial acquiring of knowledge and having the patience to treat EU4 as a turn-based game. There is surely some strategic complexity and forethought of planning required, but it's only part of the equation. Disclaimer. Yes, there is much exploiting going on. I bird plenty, use broken interactions and cheesy mechanics, CTA cancel to prevent allies from joining wars, exploit to gain max ducats and tons of reform progress, and have no respect for the purity of role-playing a 15th century monarch who longs to dev their land. That's just the nature of a speedrun world conquest. If you don't like it, this is your off-ramp. This video has timestamps to the different sections if you want to skip around or what interests you. You can see those in the description or by hovering over the timeline. Also, if you get some value or entertainment out of this video, feel free to like and subscribe as I may continue uploading videos from time to time. For a world conquest speedrun, you need only focus on a surprisingly few elements. Core cost reduction. Diplomatic annexation is far too slow and effectively impossible when frequently carrying high overextension, so the only real viable way to expand is by coring your land yourself. Ideally, you want 80% CCR so that you can get coring time down to 6 months. With that, and enough unrest reduction in some form, you can core any amount of overextension without ever getting rebels. War score cost reduction, whether versus other religions or by province. This is very important because you want to avoid ever having to fight 2 wars to annex a country. The more war score reduction you can get, the better. In this time period, you don't need full war score reduction to annex most countries, but the more you have, the more countries you can annex at once, avoiding unjustified demands. Some large countries like Ming or France will require close to the max, along with a good CB like Great Holy War. Siege ability. While it's nice to have this max so you can get 3-day sieges, it's not completely necessary. You do want some reduction to avoid long sieges, as that could restrict your ability to get deeper into land masses for more war declarations. Because of the constant war decks, you just need to make sure you can wrap up all your sieges by the time you're ready for your final peace out. Envoy travel time, or instant diplomats. As you expand around the world, the travel time of diplomats becomes a big issue. Being able to peace out a dozen countries or more in a single month is essential in making sure your coring all happens in the same month block instead of getting staggered across months and causing rebel issues. Plus, as you get into the New World, some of the travel times can get to 100 plus days without any reduction. Piecing out just the North American natives without any envoy time reductions could alone take years. Colonial range. You need this to get access to the New World and some of the far-flung islands like Hawaii. The sooner you can get to the New World, the sooner you can get conquistadors exploring and removing terra incognita. Plus, of course, you need the range to be able to take the lands in a peace deal. Years of separatism reduction. This is not strictly necessary, but it's a nice quality of life bonus since it will reduce the potential for rebels. With this high enough, rebel progress should always decrease when you don't have overextension. Tech cost reduction. You really do want to reach Tech 7 across the board as soon as you can. Admin Tech 7 opens up 2 idea group slots, offering a lot of flexibility and temporarily taking ideas for certain uses. Dip Tech 7 gives you colonial range to reach the farthest islands, and Mill Tech 7 unlocks cannons to hasten sieges and breach forts. Mana generation. All the land you're taking and the need to core it, you will have to generate a lot of admin mana. While slower campaigns can get by with other methods, or even just relying on advisors and your roller stats, the only real competitive way to do that in a speedrun is by raising. And masochists could probably do it via parliament issues, but it would be a true test of endurance. Reform progress. This is the big one. All the most recent world record speedruns were made possible by reform progress farms. With enough reform progress generation, you can max out your reforms, allowing you 45% war score cost reduction from theocracy. The extra reform progress can also allow you to swap reforms and even government types with ease. A very common move is to piece out your wars while theocracy, then switch to monarchy to benefit from the Timurids raising tier 2 reform. Parliament refreshing. All that reform progress also unlocks the incredible power of parliament issues. Normally, Parliament is fine, but having to wait 10 years between issues lessens its usefulness. With spare reform progress, you can simply switch to a non-Parliament reform and then back into Parliament, allowing you a fresh issue. Through this, you can effectively get as much dip as you want, admin with some hassle, stability when you need it, which is useful for government switching, especially when overextension makes that extremely cost prohibitive, and as much manpower and ducats as you could ever need, and then some. And of course, you need a good casus belli, one that should be able to easily get you a CB on any nation you need and to cover all the provinces you need to take. And now I'll go into the actual sources I used during my run for these various important modifiers. For CCR, the biggest source was the Anatolian ideas, which I'll explain how I got those later on. There's 5% from the ICTA government power option, and then 45% from various mission rewards from Yemen, Georgia, the Timurids, and England. When I'm monarchy with Turkish culture, I can use the Beylik for 10%, and also the tier 10 monarchy reform gives me 5%. With all these enacted, I can have 85% CCR, which is enough to get my coring time down to 6 months. What you'll note here is I am not using administrative ideas. Being able to get my CCR this high without using administrative gives me a lot of flexibility because I don't have to either keep administrative all the time or drop it and add it back from raising to get admin points. War score cost reduction. Military hegemon gives 10% province war score cost. Georgia mission reward gives 10% versus other religions. Malta Fort gives 50% versus other religions. Kaaba gives me 10% versus other religions. And the 2 theocracy reforms can give me 45% versus other religions. As such, at 90%, I can annex any country in the game. Obviously, as part of this, it's important that I'm a religion that very few countries have, which is why for a lot of the campaign, I am Shia. Siege ability. Here again, mission rewards are useful, granting me 40% of what I need. I also get 10% from the 4-4 Pulse event and 15% from the Conqueror Personality Pulse event. Additionally, there's 20% from Max Professionalism and 5% from Max Army Tradition. At 90%, most forts will be 3-day sieges. There's some with greater defensiveness, but even then, it's usually 8 days at most. Envoy travel time. Petra, the Great Project, gives me 33% reduction at tier 3, and the tier 10 Theocracy Reform Clerical Commission gives me 50%. That's 83%, which is enough for a lot of the stuff I need to do, but in reality, with all the reform progress I have, I simply switch in and out of the tier 4 reform that grants the diplomat so that I can have an instant diplomat to use whenever I want. Colonial range. The T3 exploration idea gives 50% colonial range. I don't always have this enacted, but when I need to do exploring or when I need to do faraway coring, I simply take this idea and then I do what I need to do with it. There's also 10% from a burgher's estate decision, 20% from the navigator advisor, and 10% from the navigator advisor event. In addition, Diptech 7 gives me raw 115 base range. So with all that, it's very easy for me to reach everywhere I need pretty early in the game. Tech cost reduction. So this is pretty important because getting Tech 7 in 1453 is pretty difficult. Part of my ability to do that is from all these technology cost reductions. I randomly got the Madrasa event in my first couple years, which has I think 2000 MTTH to happen. That was redundant. But that gives me 10%. Wasn't really expecting that, but I could have done it without it. It just made it a little bit easier and a bit less of a hassle. There's also a Theocracy 3-1 Pulse event, New Schools. It gives me 10%. Legalism, I can get up to 10% reduction. The Demi Estate bonus gives me 10%. The Dar al-Hadith sponsorships, which is a clergy privilege, can give you up to 10%, but unfortunately, I was stuck with a lot of burghers' crown land control, so I think I only got up to around 6.4% in my campaign. Parliament issue fund expansion of universities gives 5%. The Tier 9 theocracy reform gives 5%. And the patron of the arts ruler personality gets 5%. So those get me, approximately 61%, which is huge. And then additionally, for administrative tech costs, I can get the Tier 4 reform that gives me minus 10%. And for military tech, I can take the Tier 5 Iranian culture reform to get another 10% reduction for that. All power costs. These are useful. They reduce the cost for almost everything. And the primary source is the golden era, which is 10%, and innovativeness, which can give me up to 10%, but when I'm teching up, I'm more in the 4 to 6% range for this. Additionally, corruption. Every 1% corruption raises the mana cap by 6 points. Once the corruption is more than the combination of all power costs and corruption. So when that's positive, my mana cap starts raising. Additionally, I can increase all power costs by 5% with the burgher's control over monetary policy, which again will have the effect of raising my cap. Years of separatism. I get minus 5 years from being a conqueror ruler, another minus 5 years from a Yemen mission reward, another minus 5 years from a mercenary idea group pulse event, minus 10 years from Humanist Idea 2, and another minus 10 years from Tier 10 Theocracy Reform. That all gets me up to minus 35 years of separatism, which completely makes separatism not exist when I conquer new land. In practice, a lot of times I would only be at minus 25. With my other unrest reductions, I still would not get rebels when at 0% overextension. Mana generation. There's really only one way to do this when you're not a horde, and that is plunder economy. The Timurids Tier 2 raising reform that you get from the nomad branch of their mission tree. It's just so powerful, even at minus 50% efficiency. And for Casus Belli, the only real good option is the Great Holy War CB from the Tier 13 Theocracy Reform. It gives you 75% cost reduction and allows you to take provinces from the main peace deal without using any dip points, so very low on unjustified demands unless separate piecing. And another great thing is because I have the Deus Volt CV from the Georgia mission tree, that unlocks another aspect of the Great Holy War CB, which is that I can declare on non-neighboring nations. So this allows the Great Holy War to be used on every nation in the entire game, obviously except for those that share my religion. Since I am Shia for most of the campaign, that's only like 2 countries that I have to use something different on. Last but definitely not least is the Jewish Reform Farm. This was brought to my attention by Mithra in the Florywari Discord in March of this year. As far as I know, he was the first one to really talk about it and bring it into kind of the public sphere. And I shared that with the speedrun community, and eventually people started using it in some campaigns. How it works is that you first have to be Jewish, own Jerusalem as a core, and have the religion in Jerusalem be Jewish. Then you get this decision that pops up the Third Temple event. The first 2 options just give you ways of getting an extra tier on the Jerusalem Great Project. But the last one makes you lose 10 church power, lose 10 loyalty, and gain 10 influence. Now, you might think, why would I want that? The fact is, most estate privileges that scale based on influence aren't actually capped. As such, you can get your clergy influence all the way up to approximately 2.1 million. If you have the clergy at state privilege clerical education that grants you reform progress growth, it will scale based on your influence. As long as you can get your loyalty above 30%, it will be a positive gain, and above 60% makes it increase even more. You can easily get up to, say, 500,000 reform progress growth, allowing you to net nearly 4,000 reform progress per month, though that will be affected by your autonomy. And that will be valid for the 20 years those events are still active. Now, in practice, going up to that high of an influence has some real physical world drawbacks, as it greatly increases the size of your save file and thus the loading speed of saves. With near max influence, my loads would take 2 times as long. Pretty rough if you're going to be birding for parliament issues and the like. I settled at about 1.2 million influence, which was enough of a slowdown and loading speed that I could tolerate. Here you can see I was netting close to 2k a month in reform progress at the very start of my Jewish reform farm. Over time that would decrease as my autonomy would increase, but that was still more than enough to get me going throughout the game. If you want, you can watch the full video of the playthrough at the link in the description. I tried to cut out most of the restarts and abandoned branches, but there were a lot, so there's inevitably plenty of back and forth throughout. It will also contain all the birding time, so it's probably about 50% blank screen, all things considered. Additionally, when I was recording the video, I was only doing it in the interest of proof of doing the campaign, so it's not the highest quality, as I was trying to save on drive space. Plus, it was my first time recording videos, so I didn't really know what I was doing with the video quality. As such, as I go through my longer explanation of the campaign, I will use a variety of ways of telling it, including the actual campaign footage and screenshots from reloading saves, and PDX tools to show the wide campaign and progress during times when nothing specifically interesting is happening. Also, this video is being made 1 to 3 months after the events took place, so details might be a little mixed up, but I've tried my best to get the sequence of everything correct. Any world record speedrun campaign is divided into 2 sections. The first is the setup, where you form all the nations you need and gain all the modifiers and resources required for your run. Then begins the total war phase, where you are declaring a war every single month until your last peace out 1 month after your last war declaration. Now, my pick for starting choice is the Mamluks for a few reasons. 1. Location. They have a central location enabling balanced outward conquest. This location also allows me access to all the major oceans quickly, so I can explore and uncover other lands more quickly than some other starts might allow. They're also near enough to most of the land I want to acquire in the setup phase. 2. Their mission tree. It's perfectly set up to give me claims on most of the important land I want to conquer, ensuring I don't need to no CB anyone or lose too much in unjustified demands. 3, and most importantly, they are close to Ethiopia, which has Jewish lands from which Simeon, a Jewish nation, can be released. Using the A Question of Faith Pulse event, I can use that proximity to Simeon to convert to Judaism. The first priority is to find a way to attack Ethiopia such that I can release Simeon and have a land border to them with the least amount of hassle. I do bird a few times to get an alliance network I find palatable. Here, Aniza is allied to Beja, who is allied to Ethiopia. Since I start with a claim on Aniza, I can start the war right away on December 11th. I also declare on Ramazan, Dulkadir, and Karaman in ensuing months to begin reaching toward Georgia and Persia. In the west, I start a Fezzan-Temchkin war to get some land near Gibraltar to increase my coring range. As those wars wrap up, I go further into Arabia and eastern Anatolia, taking Arabian miners in AQ. Since I use it frequently in the setup phase, let me briefly explain CTA Cancel. It's an exploit where you can declare a war but prevent enemy allies from joining that war, thus canceling the call to arms, or CTA. I first learned about it from this video from Majir, though the true origin is probably different. I'll include the link below as his explanation will be fuller. It was an exploit that was fixed for a while but then became possible again in the 1.37.3 version of the game, which is what I'm playing on. All you have to do is bring up the exit game screen and your war declaration screen. As you click on the declare war button, you also quickly hit the C key to exit the game. If the timing is right, when you reload the game, you will only be at war with your main target and any co-belligerents that you checked. The timing can be hard to get right and seems to be affected by your CPU speed as well as things like number of saves in your saves folder. Eventually you get a feel for it and it's not hard to reproduce. Here is an example from my campaign where I declare on Ramazan and prevent his allies from joining with the empty birding and loading screen removed. During this time, I'm making sure to keep my autonomy low and stating what I can, because I need my reform progress growth to be as high as possible. I need to get 50 reform progress so I can switch to elective monarchy before December 1448. I bird for the 4-4 pulse event, Excellent Minister, to get 15 reform progress and eventually have 50 saved up. With Simeon released and having a land border, I now need to make sure that I create a situation where everyone I'm not at war with and border is at 100 dev or less. The reason for this is the way elective monarchy works. If you're a non-Christian, it will choose any neighboring independent nation you're not at war with based on development. However, it's not as simple as the neighbor with the highest development. The wiki is currently wrong here. It puts all your neighbors into groups based on development, with each group being separated by 100 dev. So, all neighbors with 300 to 399 dev will be in one group, neighbors with 200 to 299 dev will be in a different group, and so on. So, any countries that are in the same group have the same chance to be chosen as a local noble in the elective monarchy event. Since Simeon is only around 15 dev, they are in the lowest dev bucket. Thus, I need to make sure that any neighbor I'm not at war with has 100 dev or less to give me a chance of getting a Jewish ruler. This is why I release Karaman as a vassal and give them land so I don't border the Ottomans. Likewise, I'm at war with QQ so that I don't border them as they are more than 100 dev. And finally, I'm also at war with Tunis because they have an 111 dev. Here, the starting ruler and government type of the Mamluks is a huge boon. The starting ruler is 76 in 1448, which gives him a yearly death chance of approximately 33%, thus a fairly non-crazy amount of birding to get his death in a small time period, which I've done here. When he dies, you get the event pop-up from the Mamluk government to select a new ruler. If you switch to Elective Monarchy after you get that event, you will then get the Elective Monarchy event after choosing the Mamluk government event ruler. Thus, you can save when the Mamluk government event is active and then just rebird the outcome of the Elective Monarchy event, ensuring you don't have to constantly bird ruler deaths and young rulers at that. As you can see here, it doesn't matter what I choose, and in this case, I happen to get a ruler of the Sunni faith, and so what I would do is I would just reload this save and do this again and again until I get a ruler of the Jewish faith. Without this little trick, I doubt I would have had the birding tolerance to get a Jewish ruler when I have all these other potential nations that could be the local noble. This is how I get my Jewish ruler in late 1448. When the 2-1 Pulse event comes around in December 1448, I bird for the A Question of Faith event, which allows me to switch my state religion to my ruler's religion. Now my country follows Judaism. The next step is getting my missionary strength as high as possible so I can convert Jerusalem to Judaism and be able to use the Third Temple decision and start the reform farm. To get my missionary strength up, I bird for my new Jewish ruler to be a zealot, giving 1% strength. I full core Jerusalem, giving another 2% strength, and enact the religious conversion edict for another 1%. I bird for the theologian advisor event for 2%. It's a 300 MTTH event, so this took some time, even though I ultimately got it in a reasonable amount. I also enact the religious culture and enforce unity of faith privileges for an additional 2% total. There is a Jewish decision to grant 2% strength for -1 tolerance of heathens, which I take. Funniest of all, when my Mamluk ruler died and I chose the new ruler for Mamluk government, I got a hidden delayed event for Muslim rulers that 40 days later gives an event with some choices. One of those choices can grant 2% missionary strength. I had to bird for this by replaying those 40 days a few times, as the event options are set in stone upon the new ruler ascending. This event happens even though I got rid of that ruler immediately and am no longer Muslim. Paradox. I love you. I also exploit Dev in Jerusalem and concentrate Dev in Palestine to get Jerusalem down to 9 Dev. With that and 11% missionary strength, that leads to a conversion time of roughly 10 months. While all that was going on, I was continuing to expand. I take a path through QQ to get needed provinces for Georgia missions. I also start killing Arabian miners to get towards Fars in Yemen. In the west, I attack Tunis to get Tunisian land for the future Tripoli formation. Slightly annoyingly, Artabil did not get annexed or warred on by QQ, so I have to declare a separate war to take it to get claims on all of Persia via the Mamluk mission tree. When Jerusalem finally converts in October 1450, I'm ready to start the Jewish reform farm. I use an auto-clicker to repeatedly do the Third Temple decision and event to spare myself some carpal tunnel syndrome. I settle on around 1.2 million influence. I use a combination of estate decisions that grant loyalty, selling titles, and summoning the diet to get my loyalty over 30% right away so that my reform progress is positive. The first month, since I'm below 60% loyalty, I get around 900 reform, which I use to get parliament issues for more clergy loyalty. On the second month, I'm gaining close to 2k reform progress, and we're off. I switch my capital to Malatya, a Shia province I have a core on, and thus become eligible for the Adopt Islam decision, allowing me to switch to Shia. With the religious CB from Theocracy, I'll be able to have a CB on almost the entire world now, plus benefit from all the normal positives of being Muslim. I do a couple more capital changes to get the coin reduction bonus from the same cultures, and end up in Aintab because it is low dev and the only province I own from that state, helping to facilitate later culture shifts. I used some parliament issues to get up to Admin Tech 5 and Dip Tech 5. I take exploration ideas and get some explorers to begin discovering the New World. I also get a colonial range advisor and bird for his event, because that was the only way I could get coring range deep into England and Burgundy. I used my cash reserves gained from Parliament farming to get 2 important charter companies. Thanks to my high colonial range, I get a charter company right next to Burgundy and one next to England. I looked out here and that the English-French War resulted in a strong win for France and Scotland gaining land. For England and Burgundy, it also allows me to court inland right away without having to wait on a coastal core first. Now is the next phase of wars to get all the land I need for my nation formations and associated missions. I see some Hejaz lands, so I have a land path to the Yemen lands and can start coring immediately. I declare on Burgundy and bring in Aragon so that I can get Malta in the peace deal. I have France as an ally to make things easier. Georgia, Trebizond, and Ajam and its vassals are the next wards, again to get mission requirements and needed cores for formation. England comes next, and since I own a province on the island, I don't have to worry about its navy at all. I declare on Fars, who still is a vassal of Timurids, thus Tim and Sistan join the fight. More Arabian miners get declarations. Khorasan managed to win their independence from the Timurids, so I declare on them next. Transoxiana and Afghanistan are also independent, and I declare on Shirvan to bring them in as co-belligerents. With all these peace deals, Timurids is fully annexed, though sadly I have to take a Fars vassal as I didn't have enough to annex Sistan, Timurids, and Fars directly. The last war I start is against the Ottomans. During these wars, I do some culture shifts and court Georgian and Yemen land quickly so that they are done by the time my Ottoman war is done. I form Yemen, completing a number of missions, the most important ones being the 10% CCR and minus 5 years of separatism. I then form Tripoli, culture switch to Turkish, and accept the national ideas pop-up. Since Tripoli is not tied to any cultural nation ideas, I get the national ideas associated with the Anatolian culture, which has 20% CCR. I formed Georgia immediately after, getting a whole host of modifiers. 10% war score cost versus other religions, 10% CCR, 20% siege ability, 0.25 tactics, and a Deus Volt CB that will make my Great Holy War CB even better. I do some culture switches to get bonuses for coring, ensuring my coring time is 6 months on most provinces, with some former Transoxiana lands being 8 months. I have to wait on that because I need Samarkand to be cored to form the Timurids. Knowing that I have approximately 8 months before I can begin total war, I truce break QQ to get the rest of their land and declare wars against Circassia, Alodia, and Medjugorje and Multan. These wars were ones that helped complete missions or ones I knew I could finish before my cores were up. With those wars and cores finished, I can finally form England. I'm able to get the 5% CCR reform mission done from Strengthen the Great Republic, even though, oddly enough, one of its requirements says that all states' influence is lower than 50, yet obviously my clergy influence is around 1.2 million. I don't know why it accepts that, but I'm glad it does. I also get my army professionalism up to 20%, which I had been working on for most of the game, from events and spending mill points on generals, and I get just enough. The mana rewards from Yemen and Georgia were quite helpful for this, and also in a lot of these missions that would otherwise grant the unlocking of certain acts, if you do not have a parliament, instead you get a bunch of mana here, but you also get those acts unlocked. So Found a Standing Army gave me a bunch of mana, but it did also unlock the parliament issue for 50 military points. I also get the somewhat underrated parliament debate backing chance modifier of plus 25%. This is applied anytime you start a new issue, so it increases the chance of getting an auto completion, and because it raises the percentage that are already done when you start the issue, it requires a lot less bribes to complete an issue. During this time, I do some extremely tedious parliament issue farming to get my min and dip tech up to 6. At this point, I haven't embraced the Renaissance, and I'm 26 years ahead of time in tech, allowing for a high mana cap. To get it even higher, I had been debasing currency every year for a while, and then finally maxed it out. During the Parliament issue farming, I would make sure to select bribes that raise my corruption. All told, I get up to 20 corruption. I also enable the control over monetary policy burger estate privilege, which gives me plus 5% all power costs, raising the cap a further 30 points. With everything in place, my mana cap is $17.99, and that applies to all my tech types. As long as at least one of a min, dip, or mill is at $17.99 points, the cap won't lower for any of them. I once again get back to mana farming. I will not use any admin yet, so that the cap stays at $17.99. I revoke the plus 5% all power cost privilege, embrace the Renaissance, start my golden era, and use Parliament issues to reduce my corruption down to 1 to 2 points. This, combined with my other tech reductions, will lower the cost of Tech 7 to below my current cap of $17.99. I just need to farm the rest of the mana, which I do for Dip Tech 7 so that I can get that to 7 and then max out that category. Since I have a lot of ducats from the Parliament farming, I decide to get more charter companies. I raise the opinion and ally as many of these countries as I can so that I can get a charter company from Kilwa. I get one from Kandy here. I get 3 from various Southeast Asian countries. I get one off Pegu. I get one off Ayutthaya, which gives me access to the Grand Palace of Bangkok, which is a great monument. And I also get one next to Ming. The purpose of all these is so that I can start warring with all these countries all across the globe. I'm able to access mercenaries in these areas or start building troops, and I don't have to wait until I have a land border next to them from my core areas. Plus, being this far out in Southeast Asia in particular, I'll be able to explore the Pacific and start seeing all the islands and the west coast of the New World much sooner. I switched to Uzbek culture and select the decision to enthrone a Timurid prince, which gives me a Timurid ruler, and then I'm able to form the Timurids. I can now use the Timurids' infinite money exploit. With the nobility estate privileges window open, I bring up the list of decisions. I select the estate privilege Soyorgol grant, which then enables the restore treasury decision. That decision grants me approximately 1,700 ducats and makes the estate privilege selectable again. I do this approximately 540 times, and I build a couple buildings and build out some useful monuments, but the money will mostly be used throughout the campaign to pay the massive overforce limit penalties my armies will incur. I still need to get Tech 7 in admin and mill, but now I can finally get issues for all mana types. Since the English mill points issue requires being at war, I declare on Sin and bring in a huge array of Indian enemies. My goal here was to make sure I could get enough Hindustani region provinces so that I could get my raising reform mission done early. I switched to a republic and culture shift back and forth between Dutch and English. When I'm Dutch, I use their T1 to get a dip issue. When I'm English, I use their T1 to get a mill issue. Whenever I culture shift, it automatically deselects the other one, so I don't have to worry about the English T1 being a locked reform. See, I select it here, I would get the mill issue, and even though this is locked, if I then switch to Dutch by unstating English lands and stating Dutch lands, it automatically removes the Constitutional Republic. And then I can go Dutch and do as I explained. I do this until I can get Miltech to 7, and then I can take Admin Tech 7. With tech all done, I do a few manpower Parliament issues and start queuing up army templates. I go back to Dutch and take the T5 reform that doesn't spend professionalism when recruiting mercenaries, and I recruit as many as I can. I use the enthroned Timurid prince decision repeatedly until I get a ruler with stats I'm happy with. A 536 is good enough, especially when most of my monarch points are going to come from raising and parliament issues. When the month rolls around, I make sure I bird until I get the conqueror ruler personality for minus 5 years of separatism. Total war is ready to begin. From here, it simplifies a lot. You have to declare a war every month and co-belligerate everyone you can. Now, I actually did the entire Total War phase 2 separate times. This was really the first time I'd ever done this kind of constant war, and I wasn't really sure how far I could push things. So in my first pass, I declared a number of wars where I terminated the co-belligerent chain when it started to go into the HRE. I think I even had a few early wars where I did a CTA cancel to prevent some enemy allies joining in. This was because I was worried about the size of the armies these massive chains would bring in. I could easily be outnumbered 10 to 1 in some of these declarations, especially locally. However, the reality that I discovered is that there was no war I could declare that my army would be unable to handle. I had numerous morale and discipline modifiers from the various mission trees, but more importantly, I had a massive tactics advantage owing to being Miltech 7 and having the .25 tactics from the Georgia mission. I could take a 20k stack and siege a fort next to 100k Europeans, and they wouldn't even think of coming in. I could then attack with my 20k against their 100k and actually win. The biggest problem is that I was so powerful, they would often run far away, which means I couldn't always peace out even though I occupied almost all the land because of the military army size modifier. This is one of the examples where I say a game like this is in some ways a lot easier than a long campaign where you're dealing with massive armies and level 8 forts. Here is a great example of one of the massive war declarations I did. I bring in a massive amount of co-belligerents. In total, I think the countries that will be in war from this war declaration is 65. You can see the map here, plenty of areas that aren't red, and now quite red. And here is an even more massive war declaration. All told, 85 countries will join this war, and as you can see, it reveals quite a bit of the map. Native nations, so much fun. I have some screenshots of some of the more lopsided battles I remember being in. It will really show you the power of a large tactics difference as well as morale and discipline. Here in this first shot, you see I have 9% more discipline, 4.2 more morale, and a truly massive 1.2 more tactics. I have but a single infantry regiment fighting against 54,000 enemies and holding strong, and they do eventually win this fight. Another similar fight, but this time a cannon regiment is destroying a 26k army, and you can see they win here with only a few hundred losses. Here I show the start of a 4,500 strong army against a native army of 54,000 troops. We start off at max morale, but in just a few weeks they're completely routed and I only lose 1,000 men. And here's the outcome of another 4,600 men against a non-native army of 55k. They take 7 times the losses. And lastly, a below strength single regiment fights off 47k Mesoamericans, even with terrain and crossing river penalties. There really is no match for me in terms of army strength. Besides maxing co-belligerents and declaring every month, the other important consideration is the wars other countries start. You need to evaluate the current wars, and if you can tip the scale in favor of one party or another. Sometimes just being patient and letting the wars finish is what you need. You don't want to declare a war on a country that is about to annex a smaller one just to have them run off a siege that they're about to win because they're afraid of your army. Better to let them finish that and annex the country and then declare. Additionally, countries in wars often won't join their allies, so that can potentially stop a co-belligerent chain, which you don't want. Donating money in small conflicts can really tip the scales, as it can encourage them to build more troops. Most tediously, you can burn the siege ticks for other countries to help swing the war in favor of who you want to win. I did this a lot to help control the outcome of the early French-English War, a later Provence-Burgundy War, and various Japanese daimyo wars. Anytime a country stops existing without you having to declare a war is a bonus. It's also worth waiting as long as possible when you see nations without alliances or without alliances that you can get to via co-belligerence. It's rare that a nation, outside of some natives usually, will stay without an alliance for very long, so you don't want to prematurely declare unless you have no other options. You also can't really just conquer everything around them either, because they won't have any viable alliances to choose from. It's a tricky balancing act. I definitely would sometimes speed 5 through a few months or half a year to see how a nation without an alliance might go about choosing one without my interference, and then I replay those months with that information in mind. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about. There's 3 daimyos that are at war. If I declare on Ashikaga, those 3 daimyos that started a war will not join, even though they're vassals of Ashikaga. So what I have to do is make sure that one of them wins and wins quickly by birding sieges for them and giving them money to help hire more troops. In the end, I was able to resolve all 3 of these wars such that when they pieced out, the other daimyo stopped existing, and then I was able to declare on Ashikaga, and all of these 3 remaining vassals were called into the war. Once total war started, I knew I had to build up a large navy, because I knew the navies of Southeast Asia and other strong powers could be a problem if I went in with something too small, and I needed to keep them docile so that my explorers could properly explore the oceans. Using the Dutch special light ships was very helpful since they are way stronger than a regular light ship and can transport troops. In addition, I often used heavy ships to explore, despite their slow speed, since I knew they could handle enemy navies they might run into. It was important that I discover Western and Eastern Pacific and the Western New World as early as possible, as naval movement and invasions can be time-consuming, and I'd risk wasting time if I waited to handle them all until the end. With needing to get my army size to at least 1 million to claim the military hegemon, one problem that occurs is that you usually won't have enough generals to lead those armies. Given my military strength, it's not the worst thing in the world, but faster movement and sieges is still useful. I was originally just planning to tank the negative mill points from having too many leaders, but I discovered a pretty amusing and useful exploit. When you switch to a theocracy, your current heir is removed, and you get an event to choose a new heir the next day. If you make that heir a general, switch to monarchy, and back to theocracy, you'll still have your heir general, even though you won't have your heir. After 40 days, the theocracy heir event resets and you can do it all over again. The best part is that these phantom heir generals do not take up any leader slots. So you can see here I have what it claims to be 11 generals out of a cap of 6. But if you see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 odd heir generals that are not taking up a slot. And the ones that are taking up a slot are mostly my conquistadors, because there's no way to make your heir a conquistador. So that's one trick to get a lot of generals without any real penalty. One other small impediment during the Total War phase was my vassals. I actually had 6 vassals at one point: Syria, Fidel, Hejaz, Karaman, Fez, and Fars. Initially, my idea was to diplo annex them, but the reality is that even if I manipulated idea groups to get a decent DA cost reduction, the big nations like Syria and Karaman would take too long to annex, especially since my frequent high overextension would halt progress because of the lower dip rep. In the end, I annexed Fatal and Hejaz as they were small enough, but I released Syria and Karaman very early on in my second Total War run. That gave them enough time to eventually ally other nations, ensuring I didn't have to waste a one-off war on them. Still, Fars and Fez had truces too long for me to release or annex, so I had to simply declare on them. As you probably know, you can take the land of natives by annexing migratory nations, so them being inland is not a problem, except for holding overextension. However, there is one interior nation, Muisca, that is merely tribal and cannot be annexed as a migratory nation. Tyrona, the closest nation to Muisca, at its position when I declare war is such that if I outright annex it, I will have no way to border Muisca lands in Colombia, and thus no way to take their land in a peace deal. So I must take the province and let it migrate, where it fortunately migrates to the west. I can then attack and annex this land fully, and then send a colonist to the southern province so that I can then get a land border to Muisca and finally peace them out. Once Total War begins, I follow my guidelines with maxing co-belligerents, paying attention to wars, and making sure my declarations don't have missing countries. But other than that, there's not a lot that's specifically interesting to any of these wars. I simply take what I can, and I try to explore all the oceans so I get access to all the land. And that's about it. I end up taking the New World last simply because I wouldn't be able to have a way to core most of it, and I didn't want to hold that overextension because I actually wanted to do this stable for the most part. As you can see at the end, I finally take the world completely under my control in just over 7.5 years. At the end, I switched to Animus via a question of faith, as I still may take this campaign into a record 1 faith and 1 culture run. I would need to core all those disconnected native provinces, and the easiest way to do that is the Nahuatl Great Project that grants unlimited coring distance at its 3rd level. However, I want to end on a certain tag. I bird for the Cholula Temple event so I can go back to Nahuatl right away. But first, since I'm animist, I can switch to any religion, so I choose to go back to my Jewish faith. And then I peace out my last war. And I can form the nation of Israel. I figured it was fitting given that this whole campaign was made possible by the Jewish Reform Farm. And that's it. Now, let's talk about how this run could have been improved, or what I might do different a second time around. Unfortunately, while the idea was interesting and the execution was fun to play out, the play for taking England and Dutch land was ultimately a waste of time. I did it to be able to access unlimited military points via the English Parliament mill issue. But after playing the Total War phase 2 times, I realized it really wasn't an advantage to barrage and assault every fort. I originally thought my siege ability was going to be far from max, as I hadn't originally planned on completing the 20% siege ability Georgia mission. But I actually had it down to 3-day phases for most of the game, so it wasn't much of a time saver. Plus, when you assault a fort, the phases stop, and so some fort assaults were probably slower than if I had just let them go. It also caused me to waste a lot of time on getting parliament issues. When I did the full restart of my Total War phase, I rarely assaulted and only breached in certain circumstances. The mill issues were nice for getting up to Mill Tech 7 quickly, but I could have also done that easily with raising power. All the time and resources I spent on this diversion could have been better spent elsewhere. Plus, it created long truce timers with a few countries that prematurely cut off war co-belligerent chaining. If war decks weren't limited to one a month, this might be more viable, but I'm not sure about that. Without that distraction, I feel like I could have started my Total War phase much earlier, certainly in 1452 and maybe 1451. At the start of the game, the Mamluks get an event administrating the northern territories. There's an option to get cores on Syria in exchange for higher liberty desire, or you can get a hit of legitimacy and prestige to keep them happy. I decided not to take the cores as there was a mission that gave claims that required Syria's liberty desire to be low. I think it would be an interesting play to hold the event, declare war on Syria after 1 month, then take the event. You then get all that juicy land fully cored for almost no AE. The cost is -3 stability for attacking your vassal, which may realistically be too high, but it could be an interesting branch to try out. For coring purposes, it would be nice to have a fully connected path through the north too. At game start, I birded a lot for mercenaries with high siege, but ultimately it didn't matter that much because I birded breaches during the non-Total War phase and assaulted when I could, meaning that extra siege progress gain from high siege mercs wasn't that useful. I would not try for a 6 siege general again, by any means, and might even prefer stronger military stats than siege. This was actually a lot of fun. I know for a lot of people playing E4 on speed 3 or effectively treating it as a turn-based game would be intense tedium, but the micro of it all appealed to me. I've always been more of a turn-based pause player rather than real-time or fast combat, so it suits my gaming strengths. I hope I somewhat demystified these kinds of runs. In a lot of ways, using all the various exploits and tricks, things are easy. Reform Farm solves so many problems that you'd normally have to worry about, like manpower or ducats or war score cost, which also effectively solves AE as you can grow so fast that no nation would dare coalition you. The military is so powerful, nothing can stand against you. And due to the quick nature of the conquest, you only have to deal with level 3 forts and no truly gigantic blob nations. A large part of a run like this is not really strategic skill, but simply having the depth of knowledge about the game itself, which anyone feasibly could gain. There are certainly still strategic and tactical elements at play, such as choosing who to fight and when to fight and how to manage those early conquests, but it's a much smaller and more manageable problem. Additionally, actually doing the Total War phase for the first time made me realize just how much RNG matters in a game like this. The previous record holder finished in September 1462, even though their Total War phase actually started 8 to 9 months earlier than mine. While they could have reduced war decks by a handful, and my second Total War phase allowed me to improve on my first time by 9 to 10 months, that still doesn't account for all the difference. I can see an argument being made that the true measure of the fastest world conquest is how quickly you can get to the Total War phase itself. I can see a world where a Mamluks or Timurids run could start Total War sometime in 1451. Oirat may be even better, but I'm much less versed in the details of playing that nation. As long as you can only declare 1 war a month, RNG of alliance chains will greatly affect any outcome. I think it would be so interesting if the 1 war a month restriction didn't exist, as it would open up a ton of strategy and management choices for the Total War phase. Every action and decision would be much more impactful. As for what's next, I think going for world record 1 faith and 1 culture would be quite doable from here. Well, it's very much a straightforward task of doing nation formations, finishing missions, and doing parliament issues for mana. It's not really all that interesting. Instead of doing that now, I might actually try another run with all the pre-Total War improvements that I've thought about. Or perhaps a Timurids start. One thing they have going for them is they can do the infinite money exploit on month 2, which will be quite strong, and they have so many cores in the region for an early power base. We'll see. I might do a few more EU4 videos before EU5 releases. I have a lot I can talk about natives because I love playing them. I'll probably continue in EU5, assuming it at least doesn't completely fail to live up to the hype. I'm sure there will be much to break and exploit in that game at the start. Thanks again for watching.